Hello, today we will be reading Chapter 6 of Takeout by Margaret Maron. To Sam Hence's disappointment, no one answered the doorbell at number 403. The Jennings woman said she gave Maddie a freebie, Sigrid said, so why don't you go question her again while I see if my friend knew him or has anything useful to say about the neighborhood. Rudy Gottfried seemed surprised to find Sigrid at his door, but immediately invited her in and led her through a series of dark, low-ceilinged basement rooms to his studio. A bright and spacious solarium at the back that was cluttered with easels, a rack of canvases, and paint-spattered chairs and small tables. He wore a denim chef's apron with a bib that covered his short-sleeved shirt, but there was a smear of red paint on his chin. This was the first time she'd been here since shortly after Newman's death, and the sharp smell of fresh turpentine and earthy pigments hit her senses like a palpable blow, with wave after wave of a grief so acute that she had to reach out to a sturdy wooden easel to steady herself. Newman's clothes, his hair, his very skin had been so permeated with these strong, clean, almost medicinal smells that she moved blindly to the far end of the studio where she could keep her back to Gottfried and pretend to be interested in the view while she regained control. The glass curved out into a neglected backyard that was only a few inches below the windowsill. Weeds rimmed a cracked square of concrete that held a couple of plastic chairs and a rusty metal picnic table. They were shaded by a single pathetic tree not yet in full leaf. Some sort of wild vine had died on the ugly concrete wall at the rear and left behind a tracery of dried leaves and stems. No flowers, no fountain, and certainly no water lilies floated serenely on a pristine fish pond. With her hands flat on the dusty window ledge, she leaned forward to look for yellow roses atop the wall that enclosed Miss Delvito's lush garden. But from this position, 3 feet below ground level, her view was blocked by a thick privet hedge and a tall wooden fence beyond that. If Charlotte Randolph had a garden, it was hidden behind by a tall concrete wall on the other side of Gottfried's yard. He joined her at the windows, which were badly in need of washing. Good thing I was never interested in painting landscapes. I tend to forget how dreary this view is. I sometimes sit out there to read the morning paper and have my coffee. Maybe I ought to get a couple of flower pots or something. I just came from Mrs. Delvito's garden, Sigrid said, now that her emotions were back in check. Were you ever in it? He nodded. Now that's a garden Monette would have been right at home in. She hosted a meeting of the Block Association there a couple of years ago. Wanted us to sign a petition to close down a place, Gottfried said. The one with a red door? You know about that? Miss Jennings said that Miss Delvito had complained about her, but that's no concern of mine. I'm here about the 2 men who died around the corner on 6th. Did you hear about it? Wednesday morning? Yeah, some of your people came by. Cute little blonde. Did you know either of them? Just the one they called Matty. Not that I really knew him. He used to drive for the Don's widow, and he gave me a lift uptown once when he was on his way to pick her up last fall. Friendly guy. Told me his whole life story and the time it took to drive up to 44th. How his mother was the Don's cousin and how the daughter was like a sister. Any talk about him in the neighborhood? Not really. At the diner I'd heard that they were related, and that the widow fired him when he started using drugs again. He didn't mention drugs to me, but then why would he? Did you know he was still hanging around that bench on 6, and that she sent food down for him every week? Yeah, I heard that at the diner too. Gottfried shook his head in amusement. I just realized that if I didn't eat there once a week, I'd never know a thing about what goes on around here. But the widow's not the only one. Other people leave food there too. Janice Jennings, Charlotte Randolph, Nick Finmore. Who's Nick Finmore? Kid that waits tables at the diner. He takes stale bread down to the bench and feeds the pigeons there. Used to feed them in front of the diner, but it pissed off the owner. People didn't like walking through the droppings. You ever leave food there? Gottfried grinned and patted his rotund belly. Does this look like I ever had leftovers? What about the second man? Gottfried shook his head. Your blonde showed me his picture, but I never saw him before. Was it poison? The M.E. thinks so. Warfarin. Rat poison? He gave a sour laugh. Well, they did die outside, didn't they? Isn't that how a rat poison's supposed to work? Moving over to a table littered with books and papers, he opened a drawer, and handed her several old black and white photographs. I found these the other night. Think Buntrock might be interested to see what Oscar was painting back then. You can't really see the details, but I'm pretty sure that's the first picture Cohn and Munson ever sold for him. And there was Newman, young and intense, standing in front of an easel with a pipe clenched in his teeth, a paintbrush in his hand, his face half turned away as if totally oblivious to the camera. He wore a thick wool jacket and gloves that had the fingers cut off. That was our place over in Chelsea. The boiler kept breaking and the radiators never gave any heat. Is that you? She recognized Newman, but the man standing beside him had his back to the camera. He was almost as slim, but a little shorter, with a bushy head of hair, a thicker neck, and broader shoulders. Yeah, that's me, before I started to pack on the pounds. Who's that? Sigrid asked when she came to a picture of Newman, Gottfried, and a woman who had wrapped herself in a blanket from head to toe and sat atop a table with her knees drawn up as if she was freezing. Leela Nagy, you know about her? The name's familiar. She and Newman were together when he first came to New York, weren't they? Yeah. Sigrid passed to the next picture, taken on what must have been a warmer day, because the blanket was gone and Newman had his arm around her slender waist. Sigrid could not help but notice that the woman did not lean into his embrace, nor was she smiling. Long dark hair and bold eyes stared directly into the camera. She was quite beautiful, wasn't she? Sexy as hell, but too intense and crazy as a loon, said Gottfried. He ever tell you how she did a Van Gogh on him? Tried to cut off his ear? What? No, why? She was an artist too, but not half as good as she wanted to be. She was jealous of Oscar, thought it came too easy for him, that he needed to suffer for his art. Their time together had been so short, Sigrid thought. Too short for sharing all their stories. She had seen the scar behind his ear, of course, had even run her fingers along that thin white line, but hadn't asked about it because he had turned his head to her, and once their lips met, she forgot about that nearly invisible scar. Was she trying to kill him? Not really. She just wanted to drive home a point. I mean it. The woman was crazy. Still is, I suppose. She's alive? So far as I know. When I heard how Oscar went off a curve up in the hills, from LA. I asked Buntrock if that's why he was there. Sigrid stared at him in bewilderment. I don't understand. Oscar wasn't the only person she attacked. After they broke up, she stalked him and tried to stab the woman he was seeing after her. They put out a warrant on her, but she left the state before she could be arrested. Next thing we heard, she'd moved to an art colony out near Sacramento where she stabbed a teenage girl to death. I don't know that Oscar kept up with her, but the last I heard, she was serving life in prison in a prison out there for the criminally insane. And that prison is out in the hills from LA? Gottfried nodded. Oscar visited her when he was there, maybe 25 years ago. They'd cut her hair and she'd gained a lot of weight. He almost didn't recognize her, and she didn't know him at all. Sad. Still, I wondered if maybe that's where he went that day. Sigrid looked down at the pictures in her hand. Leela Nagy. Dark flowing hair. Eyes that challenged the camera. She had known there were other women before her. Beautiful women, according to the snippets of gossip she'd heard. She had never been jealous, but looking at this picture, knowing that this woman might have been the last person Newman spoke to before his death, yes, she had to admit that she was jealous. And that's the end of Chapter 6, and I will see you tomorrow for Chapter 7. As always, have a wonderful day.